Right now, thousands of college students across the U.S. are protesting the Israel-Hamas conflict. Some students have been arrested for setting up encampments on campus grounds. That same thing is happening here as well at the Auraria campus in Denver. We've been telling you about that all morning long. Our 9 News race and equity expert, Dr. Rosemarie Allen, is with us in studio this morning. Thank you so much for coming in. There is a long history here that can actually add a lot of context to this conversation.
Absolutely. When we think about student-led protest, historically, it's students who have really made substantive changes in our policies, practices, and rights today. When we look back, we know that the student-led movement, especially around the 60s, it started with women's suffrage, with labor rights, and with the fight against segregation. And when we look at what happened back then, that led into the late 60s and the 70s when we saw many protests around civil rights. We saw sit-ins and marches, voter registration, freedom rides. And then we saw this surge when in the fight and the opposition against the Civil War. Civil War, it's not the Civil War, the Vietnam War. Yes.
I was like, oh, we went way back there. Okay. I want to talk about the impact on free speech. What do you see there?
You know, it's really interesting. The free speech movement was initiated at the University of California at Berkeley. And the institutional administrators, they tried to really take away the political activities of students at the time. And students fought back. And because of the protest at that time, it really impacted not only freedom of speech, but lawful assembly, academic rights, academic priorities, and it changed the free speech movement as we know it today.
I want to talk about a little bit of the impact of when you see protests across the country like this. What kind of impact does it have on the issue at hand? Sometimes it's hard to see that big picture when you're in the middle of it, but historically, what have you seen?
Absolutely. When you look back, Anusha, you see the impact of the apartheid sit-ins and camping, much like we see today, and colleges and universities divested from South Africa, which led to the end of the apartheid movement. When we see what's happening with the LGBTQIA rights and all of the rights, most campuses have a center that supports gay rights. When we see the Black Lives Matter movement, student protests lead to change. And it's the students who are leading this. They've historically been just adamant about their voices being heard and the voices of marginalized people, not only in the U.S., but across the globe.
Well, thank you for adding context to something that we're talking about daily at this point, right? But sometimes it's hard to get that big picture context around it, so we really appreciate you coming by.
Yes, thank you so much for having me.